The new Aillio Bullet R2 Pro is here, and in this video we are going to have a close look at the machine. We are going to compare it to the R1 V2. We are going to open the machine wherever it's possible so that you can see in detail how it's built and what are the differences between the two machines. One thing we are not going to do in this video is compare all the functions in detail, because I did a very detailed video on that already, which you can find here. But at the end of this session, we are going to roast coffee on both machines so that you can see if the additional power of the R2 Pro is really affecting the roast at the end. I think that's going to be an exciting video, and now we are going to start and have a close look at two machines. The first thing we are going to do is to measure if the machines have the same sizes or if they are differently in sizes. In the first view it looks like they have the same size, but we are going to measure it to know in detail. So the diameter of the roasting chamber with the R2 Pro is 25 centimeters, and with the R1 V2 it's the same, 25 centimeters, and the height from the bottom to the top of the roasting chamber is 41 centimeters. Same here for the R1 V2, and to the top of the panel it has been 44 centimeters with the R1 V2 and 44.5, so a little bit higher with the R2 Pro. But in general the sizes of the machines are the same from the front. Now we are going to have a look at the distance of the legs, because some people have already an installation for the R1 V2. We are going to check if this will fit also for the R2 Pro. We can see here it's from the inner part to the inner part to 23.8 centimeters and to the outer part 31.5. And this is exactly the same for the R2 Pro. So if you have already an installation for the R1 V2, you can put in the R2 Pro in the same installation and just swap the machines if you like to. But we are going to have a look at the length now of the roasting chamber, if it is also the same. And if I measure here on the R1 V2, I can see it's 35.8 centimeters, and the same also for the R2 Pro. And the total length of the machine is 60.5 centimeters, which is the same for the R2 Pro as well. So the machines are the same in size, and now we are going to have a look on the details of the hardware, what have changed then in detail. Therefore we are going to start with directly this view here, and if I look at the machines I can see here that on the R1 the power plug was on this side, like on the left side if I look from the front, and then the plug for the cooling tray is on the right side. This has swapped with the R2 Pro, so here the plug for the cooling tray is on the left side and the power will be on the right side. The plug for the cooling tray in general is the same for both machines from the outside, but with the R2 Pro it has more power behind, because the R2 Pro will have the Pro cooling tray that will be delivered beginning of 2025, and the R2 Pro cooling tray will need more power, and this power is coming directly from this outlet. So if you want to use the R2 Pro cooling tray on the R1, which is possible, you will also put it on the outlet for the cooling tray, but in addition to that you will also plug it to the power. So we'll have a connector for the power, which you will only need if you use it on the R1. On the R2 Pro, the power comes directly from this outlet here. You can see that there are bigger holes here for the venting of the induction element on the R2 Pro, because it has a much more powerful induction element, and therefore also
You can see that the cover of the induction element is much thicker with the R2 Pro. It's about 5 centimeters, while it has been around 3 centimeters for the R1 V2. That is because the whole induction element is a bit bigger, and we're going to have a look at the induction element, of course, also in this video. If you are having a look on the other side of the machine, you can see with the R1 V2, there was the connector for the cooling tray here. This has, as said, swapped to the other side with the R2 Pro. What I can see here is that the power plug is now on this side, and it has a switch to turn on the power and turn off the power. This is something that a lot of people have wished for, because like that you can always leave your machine plugged in, switch it off here, and you don't have to unplug it in the evening. What you can see here is that the R2 Pro legs, they have some holes here, and also on this side here. The idea behind it is that a lot of people are going to use the machine on, for example, markets where they mount it on a cart so that they are mobile with the machine. And these holes here will help you to mount the machine properly if you have a mobile solution for your roaster. If you look at the front of the machine, we can see some changes here. Starting on the bottom here, the new machine is directly coming with the bean deflector. This is something that the R1 V2 was missing. It's an important tool because otherwise the beans can fall out on the side when you're taking them off the machine. So a lot of people then were buying bean deflectors and mounting them here, and with the R2 Pro it's directly coming with the machine. What has also changed is the design of the knob. The design of this knob here was a bit like a pier, and here it's a round knob with a much thinner rail. And the reason why they changed the design was that with the R1 V2 the knob could get a little bit hot if you were roasting a lot and a high amount of beans. And this new design of the knob is getting less hot, so it's much more convenient to take it in the hand and open it to release the beans after the roasting. What you can also see is that on the R1 V2, the knob was on the right side, just below the dryer here. And one advantage was that you can then put in the dryer here when you wanted to release the beans out of the machine. On the R2, they have changed the design a little bit. It's still the same dryer, but the dryer is now mounted so that it's reaching a little bit outside, while it was straight on the R1 V2. And also the knob for the door is now on the left side from the front, while it was on the right side before. And the reason why they changed it is that they have mounted here a really great light with which you can see the beans in the roasting chamber perfectly. I'm going to switch it on now, and you can see here how beautifully the light is illuminating the roasting chamber, because the color of the roasted bean is the most important factor when it comes to the quality of the roast. Therefore, you need to have good view on the beans. With the R1 V2, it was solved with this little LED that could be mounted here, and the solution on the R2 Pro is much better with this beautiful light. But in order that the light is getting perfectly into the roasting chamber, they needed to change the position of these knobs a little bit. If you look at the bean inlet, this looks in general the same, but I can see here that there is a little metal rail, and this is the sensor which is then reaching into this tube here, which is measuring the airflow in the tube. And this is one of the big differences between the R1 and the R2, that is measuring actually the airflow in the system and adapting the setting of the fan according to the airflow here. The reason for that is that sometimes the machine can be clogged a little bit, and then the airflow is getting lower and your roast can be inconsistent. And with this new sensor and the new system that is then correcting the airflow, you have a consistent airflow no matter if your system is not perfectly clean here in the chaff filter, for example. And then the control panel has changed. We are going to have a look at the control panel in detail as well. It was a LED with the R1 V2, and it's an OLED with the R2 Pro machine now, but also the way it is being mounted and disassembled from the machine is much easier now. I'm going to show you how this is working. The reason behind it is if you want to access the IBTS sensor, for example, from behind, if you want to change the fan of the IBTS or
need to replace the IBTS sensor, then you had to unscrew the panel here, which was taking you about 3 minutes or 5 minutes. It hasn't been too much of a work anyway, but with the R2 Pro it's even simpler. You can just then unscrew a screw here and take it off. We are going to have a look at how this is working in detail now. And therefore we are going to open the panel now with the screwdriver set that is being delivered with your machine. Actually, this little set is the same for the R1 V2 and for the R2 Pro. Also, the content is mostly the same. Of course, we will do a detailed video also where you can see what's coming with the machine. It's coming in a couple of days and will be linked here or also in the description. The only two little differences in the content of this set will be the different knob for the door here, and that the R2 Pro is coming with an USB-C connector here. The R1 V2 in the old version had a mini USB, but in the new version is also coming with the USB-C cable. The first thing we are taking off is this little cover on the R1 V2. You can see here behind this panel is the microphone, which is giving the instructions like the bullet is now ready or you can charge now, and behind it are the knobs. And now you can see here that is the back of the control panel where you have the connector of the BT probe, where you have the connector of the IBTS, and where you have also the connection between the induction board and the control panel. And if I'm going to release these screws here, I can then access the IBTS sensor from the backside if I, for example, want to replace it or exchange the fan of the sensor. And here you can see the IBTS sensor from the backside with the fan. You can check if it's perfectly positioned here. For example, it's not measuring properly anymore. I can see here the connector for the BT probe and the connection of the control panel with the induction board. If I want to do the same on the R2 Pro, then there's actually just one screw that I can take off here, open the panel here, and then I have access directly to the IBTS sensor. And as you can see here, this is the sensor connection for this airflow control, and then here the sensor is connected to the control panel, as well as the connection from the control panel to the board is done with these little connectors here, so that I can just put it on and take it off as I wish. I don't know about you, but I am actually quite interested in seeing how the panel of the R2 Pro is going to look at the backside. So I'm going to open it now as well, just to see if it's constructed the same or if it has changed a little bit. As you can see here, there are again the speakers. I have now 2 holes for the speaker. So I have 2 speakers behind it, a little bit more louder sounds most probably. We'll check it later. And then I can see I have, in addition to the LEDs here, also the OLED display, which is giving me more information. Everything looks very clean and very well solved by Aillio. And now I'm curious to see what's behind this plate, because there are all the sensors of the machine. There is where the magic is happening, and therefore we are going to open this plate, of course, as well now. And what we need for that is the cooling tray. Here is actually the cooling tray. We haven't been talking about it so far. We are now in November, end of 2024, and the machine is still being delivered with this cooling tray that we know from the R1 V2 machine. It's a cooling tray that has been working really well. But for the Pro machine, there has been developed a special cooling tray, which is a bit stronger, which has also a opening where you can then let out the beans after the cooling. And this is going to arrive in beginning of 2025. So if you buy a R2 Pro now, end of 2024, you get it initially with this cooling tray, and then later we will ship the new Pro cooling tray for free to you. If you buy the machine later in 2025, if you're watching this video a little bit later, then it might already come with the new Pro cooling tray. This cooling tray here is pretty simple. You can see it's actually a bowl with a vent here. The vent is pulling out the air so that there is an airflow in it, which is cooling the beans. There is a little mat that is protecting the fan from the chuffs. And here is the bowl where the beans and some chuffs are landing, and then the beans are actively being cooled. This is the cooling tray that you have in the R1 V2, and that has been very useful for this machine. But now for our project, we are going to put it here, because then we can place the plate on it. We're going to start with the R1 V2 again and unscrew the 6 little screws here. You can put the plate here actually in the cooling tray so that it holds very nicely. This is something that you are going to do regularly because here you have access to the IBTS sensor that you can clean for about twice or 3 times a year. So you can see here the IBTS sensor from the front. You can see here the BT probe where the beans are moving. It's measuring the bean temperature. All in all, you can see it's a very well used R1 V2. Going to use the opportunity to clean it then also directly for closing it again. And now we are going to have a look at the plate of the R2 Pro, if it looks the same or if there are changes behind it. Okay, this is something nice. I didn't knew this about the machine. You can completely detach the front of the roaster. Here it has been hanging on this cable, and this is of course much nicer to clean it if you want to clean the IBTS, but also the plate behind it. When we look at the panel, we can see here the bean probe, the same as we had in the R1 V2. Here the IBTS, which is now even easier to access for cleaning. And in addition to that, the new sensor here, which is a little tube. As you can see, there is a hole, there's a tube, and this is then measuring the airflow in this tube here so that the machine can make sure that the airflow is automatically regulated and is always the same in your machine. Other than that, here the connection between the front panel and then the rest of the machine, the induction board, the fan at the back, really beautifully done here at the front. We can see here the differences between 2 machines. The drum is actually the same. It's a really heavy, strong carbon steel drum. You can see here the drum in it with the isolation. Here are then the bearings and the axis of the machine, which is being held in the front panel. You can see that there are some plates here that make sure that the beans are continually in movement during the roasting. And the big difference is that this already used roaster is really black inside, and it's supposed to be like this when you're roasting with the Aillio Bullet. The fresh machine is silver inside, and the first thing we are going to do with this machine before roasting is a so-called seasoning, where we are going to do 3 roasts that are really dark, and after that, when the drum will be black like this one here, the measurement will be more precise, and it's going to be protected because these coffee oils are being burned in the drum. Now we're going to close the machine again and are going to check it on the back side if it looks the same or if there are some changes as well. If we open the R1 V2 here, then we have the chaff collector box, which has the mesh chaff filter here, the filter that you need to regularly clean in order to maintain a good airflow. Chaffs are being collected in this box, and here you have a little opening to release the chaffs out of the machine. And if you have a look at the R2 Pro, you can see it's exactly the same chaff filter. So the chaff filter box hasn't changed at all. Now I'm going to turn the machine so that we have a little bit a better view on the back of the machines. If we check the machine here, they look pretty similar. I have the impeller wheel, which is then managing the whole airflow in the system. I have here this little tube where the air is being let through. And here is the wheel, which is turning the axis of the roasting chamber. And then here I have this little vent to cool the induction element here in the R1 V2. And if I'm looking at the R2 Pro, I can see that I have the same impeller wheel. If I would look into this little tube here, I would see at the end this little sensor that we have seen when we've opened the machine. So this little tube which is measuring the airflow in the system. Here is also then the wheel for the axis of the machine, and I can see that there is no vent anymore for the induction element, so I assume that the cooling of the induction element has been solved a little bit differently. Last but not least, we are going to turn the machine to see how it looks like behind this cover. Is this still the same, or if they have done changes here as well? So here it's actually the same. The only difference, the board here is in green, while in my R1 V2 version it was in black. And if you are interested in what's happening here, there are actually two motors. One motor here is the motor which is here for the drum. So you have a little pulley here, and then you have a transmission, and then this motor is going to turn the drum of your roaster. And this motor here is the motor for the impeller wheel, so for the airflow in your machine. Here is a little board that is going to control it, and a fuse on the board. So we are going to close it here and then have a look at the machine at the bottom, because the induction element which is placed here is one of the big changes in the machine. If we look at the machine from the bottom, we can see that there are quite some changes here in the induction element. That is actually also where the biggest difference has happened, because the R2 Pro has much more power, much more powerful induction element than the R1 V2. One other small thing, maybe you recognize, as I told you before, here in the legs, there are these little cuts here, which are helping you, together with the hole here, to mount the machine on a rail or something like that, if you have a mobile solution for your machine. But now we are going to take off these covers, and if you have a look at the cover, you can see here the R2 Pro has much more holes, so much more openings in the whole induction elements on the side, but also on the bottom, than the R1 V2. Now let's have a look at how it looks below these covers. What we can see here is the backside of the induction element. If you're interested in how the design of the induction element itself has changed, then head over to Aillio's Instagram channel or YouTube channel, where they share all this information in detail. Here you can see that the fan has mainly changed. So as we have seen before, there was this opening on the side and this large fan, which is then cooling the induction element. And on the other side, on the R1 V2, we had the fan that was placed on the bottom. Also through the fan, we can see a little bit of the induction element. And this is the biggest difference. And then here, the whole platine has been changed a little bit. I assume that many of you are more into electrotechnics than I am. Therefore, for many of you, there will be more information here than for me. I just see a lot of connectors and a lot of chips. But I just wanted to show you how it looks like, because the induction element is actually the biggest change, especially when it comes to power of the machine. And we are going to turn the machines again and having a look at the control panel of the machine. If you have a look at those panels, you can see that the logic behind them is the same. You have the two function buttons here, the plus minus buttons at each function button, which you can set up your machine. You have then here the displays. In addition to the R1, you have not only then the bean temperature and the IBS temperature, you also have the pressure in the machine. The big difference between those two displays is then the OLED, which is on this side of the R2 Pro, and which is giving you much more information, where you can display various information on the machine. And in addition to that, it has a much stronger processor, so it will have much more functions in the future, in the next firmware updates. The logic behind the two systems is the same. So you have these cycles of preheating, roasting, cooling, and then cycling into the next roast. The back-to-back roasting will be a bit nicer displayed on the R2 Pro machine. It was already possible on the R1, but it's a bit better guided on the R2 Pro. I will give you a detailed description of this panel as soon as the final firmware is on the machine, because now it has only a pre-series firmware. And in a couple of weeks, there will be the final firmware when the machines are being launched. And then we'll do a video where I explain you the whole machine, including then the final production firmware. Also, the software behind is the same. You're working with the same roast time software. You have the roast world behind. And what's also beautiful about it is that you can switch profiles from R1 to R2. So if you have developed profiles on the R1, you can use them still on the R2 machine. For your understanding, the machines are so calibrated that the P settings are the same. So P1 on the R1 is the same as P1 on the R2 Pro. It goes until P9 on the R1. And then the R2 Pro has some more power steps above that. It has power step 10 until 14, so it has more power on the top, but all the other settings are the same. Same for the fan, so F1 for the R1 is the same as F1 for the R2 Pro. And therefore you can then directly take R1 profiles on the R2 Pro machine, just you're not using the full potential of the machine because they are going until P9 and the R2 Pro would have more power, so you're not using the whole power of the machine, but you can still use your profiles. In the other way, if you're taking an R2 Pro profile on the R1, that's working, but every power step above from P9 will then be a P9 setting on the R1. So if you have profiles on the R2 Pro that are really fast, powerful, then they will be limited a little bit on the R1, but the other side, like taking R1 profiles on the R2 Pro, is going to work perfectly. But now we are going to really compare these two machines in real life. So we're going to do a roast on both machines with full load so that we can see how fast the R1 is and how fast the R2 Pro is. So if this additional power is really doing something in the praxis. And therefore we need to season the drum of the R2 Pro, but the seasoning of the drum will be recorded in a separate video that we'll publish in a couple of days also on this channel. So now is the moment. Now we are going to compare the power of the two machines. We are going to do a same roast on both machines so that we see how much the additional power of the R2 Pro then really makes a difference in the daily use of the machine. We are going to preheat both machines to 310 degrees IBTS, and then we are going to take the maximal amount of beans, so 1 kilo for the R1 V2 and 1.2 kilo for the R2 Pro. We are going to roast them with the same settings. Drum speed 9, fan 3, but the maximum power, so P9 for the R1 V2 and P14 for the R2 Pro. And we're going to roast them until 200 degrees IBTS. And at 200 degrees IBTS, I'm going to take it down 3 steps. So then it will be P6 on the R1 and P11 on the R2 Pro until 210 degrees IBTS, where I'm going to finish the roast. After that, I'm going to do a back-to-back preheat again to 310 degrees Celsius, and I'm going to measure the time it takes to preheat the machine until it's ready to roast, the time from start of the roast to first crack, then also the time until the end of the roast, and the time from the end of the roast until it's ready again for the next roast. Because these are the relevant data that you need if you want to do production roasting on these machines. I'm going to start with the R1 V2, and we are going to preheat it now to 310 degrees IBTS. I have set now 310 degrees IBTS on the R1 V2 and start the preheat now. The preheating of the R1 V2 is now on since 9.5 minutes, and we are at the IBTS temperature of 235 degrees Celsius. The preheating of the R1 V2 is now on since 13.5 minutes, and we are at the IBTS temperature of 286 degrees Celsius. After 15 minutes and 40 seconds, the Aillio Bullet R1 V2 has reached an IBTS temperature of 310 degrees Celsius, but it's not ready to roast yet because the preheating always measures the temperature of the IBTS as well as the bean probe and waits until the whole system is stable. This takes a couple of more minutes, and the machine is giving a sign which is called charge, and then the machine is really ready for roasting. Now it's ready. After 27 minutes and 40 seconds, the R1 V2 is preheated at 310 degrees IBTS and ready to roast. Now I'm going to charge the machine with 1 kilo of a washed coffee from Honduras. Then we're going to settings of drum speed 9, fan 3, and power setting P9. We are now 3 minutes in the roast, and IBTS temp is at 148, and the bean probe is at 135 degrees Celsius. We're now 7 minutes in the roast, and the IBTS is at 190, the bean probe at 188 degrees Celsius. After 8 minutes and 7 seconds, the machine has reached 200 degrees Celsius, and I went down to P6. And now, after 8 minutes and 26 seconds, first crack has been reached. After 9 minutes and 30 seconds, the machine has reached 210 degrees Celsius, and I'm going to stop the roast now and directly cycle into the next back-to-back. After exactly 4 minutes, the machine has been preheated again to 310 degrees IBTS. Also, the beans are now cool after 4 minutes, so even though the new Pro cooling tray will be even stronger, already this one is a really powerful and really efficient cooling tray. Now it's going to be interesting because now I'm going to preheat the R2 Pro to 310 degrees Celsius. We're now preheating since 3 minutes and the IBTS is at 125 degrees Celsius. We're now preheating since 6 minutes and 8 seconds and the IBTS is around 200 degrees Celsius. After 12 minutes and 50 seconds, the R2 Pro has reached the preheat temperature of 310 degrees IBTS, but also here we will wait until the charge sign and then mark the time. After 30 minutes and 30 seconds, the machine is ready to charge and is ready to roast, and we are going to put in this 1.2 kilo of beans now, and I'm curious on how fast the machine will be roasting. The beans are now in the machine, and I'm going to roast now, as said, with the same drum speed, the same fan speed, but with full power P14 on this machine until 200 degrees IBTS. After 2.5 minutes, the machine is at 125 with the IBTS and 110 with the bean probe. After 5 minutes, we are at 172 degrees IBTS and 169 bean probe. After 6 minutes and 55 seconds, first crack started and 200 degrees Celsius was reached, and I went down with the power. And now, after 7 minutes and 35 seconds, we have reached the 210 degrees. And now, after 2 minutes and 45 seconds, the machine is ready for the next roast. And now we have the results. I checked them also in the system to give you the right numbers for sure. And we start with the preheating. The preheating took on the R1 V2 27 minutes and 40 seconds until the whole system was ready to start roasting. With the R2 Pro, it was 13 minutes and 30 seconds until the machine was ready to roast. Then the roasting with the 1 kilo batch on the R1 V2 took 8 minutes and 3 seconds until 200 degrees IBTS. With the R2 Pro, it was 6 minutes and 55 seconds, so it was about 1 minute and 30 seconds faster at 200 degrees Celsius. That was also the point where first crack appeared. Then until 210 degrees IBTS, the R1 V2 took 9 minutes and 31 seconds, while the R2 Pro took 7 minutes 35 seconds, so it was about 2 minutes faster to end the roast. And last but not least, between the batch, so the preheating again from the end of the roast until the machine was ready for the next one took 4 minutes with the R1 V2 to get again to 310 degrees Celsius, and 2 minutes 45 seconds for the R2 Pro. So this was about 1 minute and 50 seconds faster. So you see, all in all, in addition to the higher capacity, the R2 Pro is faster in preheating, in roasting, and in between the batch preheating. And this is, of course, especially relevant for you if you're roasting production, because then you have a much higher output per hour with the new machine. I hope this video was helpful for you and was fun to watch. I hope it gave you more clarity on the differences of the two machines. If you're interested in the different functions of these two roasters, then have a look at the video that we uploaded a couple of weeks ago. If you're interested in buying a machine, or if you have any specific questions, then always come back to me. You'll find my contact as well as a lot of information on these two roasters on our website roastrebels.com.